It's a no-no. Sub-Saharan Africa. So welcome to the session. I am going to introduce the speakers, our keynote presentation, and Dr. Jackie Crawford is online, and we would ask our technical guys just to assist us with getting Dr. Jackie Crawford on, please.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the session.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen.
Thank you.
Please can you let me know if you can see the shared screen? Was that a yes? Yes. Okay, thank you very much. So thank you very much. My name is Jackie Crawford. I'm sorry that I cannot be there in person this afternoon. Thank you very much to Kevin Peterson for the invitation to do this presentation. I realize the time is quite short, and I've got a lot of content here, and also I can sometimes talk a little bit too much, so I'll just jump straight into the presentation. So my background is that I'm a resource economist, and the company that I work for, Prime Africa, has done a lot of work over the years in the field of resource economics, and in particular in the topic of the value of water. So we were approached in 2019 by the Law School Irrigation Forum, as they were interested to understand the value that agriculture in the Law School area adds to water in particular. And as a result, we've conducted a 3-year study. As you will see in the results, we have a review of 2019, 2020, and 2021. Essentially taking stock of the economic performance. I just want to check, I get quite a lot of feedback on my side. Do you have the same problem on your side at the university? Is it okay? I'll continue. So the study was done over a 3-year period, and I think what's interesting, as you will see, is that it obviously coincided with before lockdown, during lockdown, and after lockdown. So some interesting patterns. When Kevin approached me around this topic that we're exploring today, I thought this would be a very interesting and relevant case study around a variety of issues on investment, climate smart investment, investment in smart agriculture. I know this is not focused, this is a surface water resource, this is not a groundwater resource, but some extremely interesting investment initiatives being driven by the farmers of the Law School irrigation area to add value to water and to build agricultural resilience. So the study, as mentioned, this is fairly hot off the press. I received permission from the Law School Irrigation Forum to present these slides to you today. And so I think it's the first time that it's released to a wider audience. We had extremely good working relationship with the farmers and with the members of the forum, and a lot of information shared. And of course that was very helpful to ensure that the results shared here are accurate in nature. So if we can just take one of the key questions that we were asked right at the outset it was a very simple question: what's the value of water? And when everything was said and done, and we ran the study 3 times, we performed the study in 2019, then again in 2020, and then again in 2021. So there was no, each year's assessment was completely unbiased and independent of the previous years. No influence of one set of 1 year's assessment on the next. And after having done all of this and intensively studied production patterns, as market prices, input costs, the effect of the inflation that we saw coming through last year, energy effects. We haven't seen in these numbers really yet the extreme load shedding impacts on irrigation that we do have in South Africa at present. So that's perhaps one effect that we haven't picked up. But it's remarkable. I'll show you in a moment a slide where we ran an experiment which said, what if there was no irrigation in this area? In other words, what if there was no investment in smart agriculture, because it's really some smart agriculture that takes place in the Loskop Valley. And the difference between an experiment run on production without irrigation compared to the current reality that we see is phenomenal. So really some telling economic numbers and benefits to a wide variety of stakeholders of doing smart agriculture. The total, just some high-level highlight numbers, the total area under different forms of cultivation and also some grazing is just over 43,000 hectares, so it's a very large area. In 2021, 22,000 jobs created. It was interesting that the job creation actually increased during the COVID period in this area. So lockdown didn't have a negative effect on the average farming practices. In fact, probably the requirement for healthy foods, there's a lot of citrus and grape production in this area, actually benefited from the lockdown market trends. A very significant contribution to the fiscus through tax revenues of various types, value-added tax, income tax, field taxes and the like. A significantly large revenue. And then the question which probably gets us generally closer to the topic that we're discussing today is what drives this performance, this economic performance. And we have 2 takeaways which we've discussed and debated at length with our colleagues down in Loskop. And we believe there's two key drivers. And the first one is the entrepreneurial ability of the farmers of that area, who have taken significant commercial risks and to invest in infrastructure and agricultural practices that improve land productivity and land value. And I'll have a slide on this in a little while. And then, of course, without the availability of good quality water for irrigation, none of this would be possible. Now, with entrepreneurship, I'm an economist, studied as an economist, and for those of you that are also familiar and also from my field, we will know that the term entrepreneurship is very complex. It's much more than a person with a knack or a talent for running a business and making money. It's a much wider I suppose, set of skills that definitely include smart ways of operating, and in this case, smart agriculture, and also very importantly, relationships and partnerships and smart institutions. So that is fundamental, I think, to the success of that we certainly see through the economic numbers in this area. Just a few highlights and headlines, and I'm not going to go through the detail of the text, don't worry. So we saw in 2019, which was our baseline year, an estimated gross income of 2.6 billion rand in that year. This increased significantly to above 7.3 billion rand in 2020. And this was driven by a weakening South African currency, the rand weakening against the dollar, and combining with a very large demand in Europe, especially for high vitamin C type of food products, and especially the citrus produced in this area. We saw in 2021 that this dropped down again, and this was in line with post-lockdown types of foreign exchange rates and also demand patterns. Although we did see that the inflationary effect of global inflation interrupted supply chains and the like did come through in 2021. So 2020, a really great year. 2021, not bad, but revenue coming down and prices being squeezing the margins from the bottom. But very interestingly and tellingly, preserving jobs, actually, with job creation actually increasing and growing into 2021. We don't know exactly why that is. It's obviously good news, but certainly smart agriculture in the way that's performed here, certainly contributing to rural job creation and the benefits that go with this. A few other highlights: significant contribution to the fiscus through the various taxes. The value-added component is what's contributed to GDP, so that's positive. And balance of payments, which is a positive, which means the volume of export exceeded the volume of imports. Just a little bit for those of you who might not be familiar with the Loskop Valley. There are several irrigation schemes that are fed by the Loskop Dam. I think those are. I'll show in a moment a bar chart of the types of crops grown in the area. So it's quite a variety of crops. But before we get there, I think this is important to mention. In one of the key questions that I mentioned at the outset was related to what's the value of water. So we did a hypothetical experiment where we said, what if there wasn't irrigation? What if there wasn't a dam? What would have been the alternative use of the land, and what would the equivalent performance have been? And it's remarkable. What we see, these very long red numbers that we see in the final column, is the difference between the actual production that we saw in 2021 and the hypothetical dry land agriculture scenario that we saw. The intention here is not to work you through the numbers and impress all of us with how many zeros there are and how many millions there are, but to demonstrate the very significant leverage that is available through the availability of smart investment in water, to make water available for agriculture. So phenomenal numbers, and it translates into all kinds of economic activity, into all kinds of food security, into tax benefits at the government level, into balance of payments, and into GDP contributions. The Loskop Valley area is downstream of the largest coal mining areas in South Africa. And so there is an emerging risk of poor water quality. And this is not something that the operators of the dam or the irrigation farmers downstream can manage on their own. All they can do is essentially monitor inputs and be actively partake in the relative forums and initiatives that seek to ensure that good quality water comes from upstream. So once again, when I thought about the purpose of this particular talk, I think the reliance on a water supply system and a yield system, in this case surface water, but of course we know there's many similarities to groundwater, on the various institutional arrangements that ensure that the yield is always available and correctly managed and of good quality is obviously crucial. An extremely important aspect that we focused on in the last version of our study is the very active focus that many of especially the larger farmers, the corporate farmers in that area, has on honouring South Africa's social compact. A few years ago, in our State of the Nation address, the President asked for private investors to enter into a social compact with its stakeholders, and predominantly the labour sector. And several of the farmers embraced this and have very impressive and extensive programs that support their farm labourers and also their families in different ways. Not just social support, but also in generating their own business opportunities and developing outgrower schemes and so forth. So a very important aspect of the whole institutional set of arrangements. Similarly, we did a deep dive in the study into 3 of the projects of Schoeman, Schoonby, and Engelbrecht Trust. Just a little bit more of the detail, and I'm not going to go through all these slides, and I also realize that my time is probably already over. What I would like to take you to is a particular 2 slides to perhaps to wrap up my talk and to focus on in particular. The first one is this bar chart, which shows the type of crop under cultivation. Not all of these are irrigated, but in the carefully selected orange colors at this top right-hand quadrant, one sees a lot of citrus, and then in the purple, table grapes. So what is busy happening is that there is an increasing trend of increasing orchard production for citrus and table grapes with extremely high levels of investment. And we see on an annual basis how the area under shade net in particular increases. And if I skip forward to that particular slide, some very interesting investment patterns. What is happening is farmers are reinvesting the profits made, especially during the lockdown period, in shade netted production areas. This obviously has many benefits. It reduces various kinds of crop risks from weather-related events and insects and so forth. It also provides a much more accurate control over the irrigation process, with certainly much more water productivity or productiveness in water use during the irrigation process. One of the interesting comments that we heard is
a benefit unrelated to production costs or climate resilience is actually the fact that the farmer can then, I suppose the word is to say, hide away from the fellow farmers the kind of crops that they're growing, and it's gives them an important competitive advantage in the market to be able to farm behind closed doors, as it were. So we see a definite and a very strong increasing trend in this kind of agriculture in the Loskop area, and this moves us really into a domain of precision agriculture with definitely increased climate resilience, much more productivity with respect to water use, and significantly higher levels of economic value added. Now, I think the last point I wish to say is, I think in the discussions I had with Kevin leading up to this particular event today, one of the matters that was raised was the matter of blended finance. Blended finance obviously is a very hot topic around the world, and many an interesting green financing type of initiative being structured and built around around blended finance. But the commercial banks in this area in the Loskop have developed their own form of blended finance, where specialists in agricultural finance would be approached by a farmer with a particular business model, and definitely going a long way to enabling investments of this nature to certainly make the transaction easier, and enabling the investment to take place in a much more structured fashion, and with much lower than otherwise transaction costs. So I think what I wish to say in summary is that there are certainly examples already in Sub-Saharan Africa, and in particular taking this case of the Loskop Valley irrigation area, where a combination of authentic institutional arrangements, where very smart entrepreneurs apply very smart agricultural systems, and in a very transparent manner engage with all their stakeholders, and these include their farm laborers, their suppliers, their bankers, their financiers, and also the relevant water authorities, to ensure that the complexity of this business of irrigation gets executed in such a way that the economic benefits that are demonstrated remains resilient, even through a time period such as we had recently with COVID and lockdown. I think I have actually exceeded my 15 minutes by a few minutes, so I think I'll conclude the slides right here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crawford, and thank you for this fantastic overview. I am on. Fantastic overview of one of the most successful run public-private partnerships in terms of the Loskop Dam. I took the liberty of changing our, I know on the program it was supposed to be, and what worries me, it's just saying Engineer James Saromba. I don't know, and I've asked the organizers why is it put that way, but you will speak up next. I went through to Dr. Crawford first just to make sure that our order, the rest of the speakers are all present in the room, so and Dr. Crawford can sit back and relax now and prepare for all the questions that's coming his way. But you are very welcome, Engineer Saromba. Please give us an overview of yourself. I'm sorry, I'm just going along with the program. Thank you.
Thank you, facilitator, for this opportunity to speak. I was given 5 minutes, and I have 5 slides. So don't worry about the content on the slides. It's just to give you an impression of what am I talking about. So I was meant to set the scene and a basis for partnerships. Where do we get partnerships in the investments for increased sustainable water management? And of course, the first slide, which you can go to, talks about the scenario in our region where both surface and groundwater. Please take the next slide. Where both surface and groundwater. Oh, it's me. Okay, sorry. Down is forward. Okay. So in our region, we have both surface and groundwater existing in similar geographic locations. So partnerships are required in order for us to manage in the same areas at the same time for both ground and surface water. We also have the scenario of integrated water resources management. We see the different cycles there. One is talking about the hydrological cycle, where there are different actors that play in that region. We also have watershed and land use, which requires a different set of stakeholders. And we also have the economic, social interactions and institutions that play in that terrain that demand partnerships in order to develop this resource. So the enablers there are about stakeholder participation, integrated planning, water demand management, conflict resolution, and the integration of gender equality and social inclusion issues. We also have in our region the integration that goes from the regional level and goes to the country level. We've got different laws, statutes, instruments that guide us from regional to national level. And within this environment, we need partnerships if we are to have those actions that impact others across the region to also impact at national level. So the enabling environment coming from the policy, legal, and institutional environment has to create the partnerships necessary for that, to harmonize transboundary frameworks. Then we also have, in a very large context, when we look at water resource management and investments associated with that, we have got 3 pillars. One is on improved coordination. We have got institutions that play in that pillar. We also have institutions that play in the pillar of improved stewardship. And then we also have institutions and actors that play within the improved knowledge pillar. So this is more like just for you to visualize what I'm talking about. And then the different actors or the different investments come in quite a number of areas. So I have used 4 different entry points. When we look at institutions, we need partnerships to have an enabling institutional setup for investments in the water sector. When you look at information, you cannot manage what you don't know. So we need partnerships in that regard. And I think the example that the doc was talking about also goes back to these issues. You cannot decide if you don't know what is required in terms of information. We also look at instruments. We need policies, we need regulations, we need guidance. You will not be able to pay the VAT. You will not be able to pay to government if the right environment is not created. And you also talk of infrastructure. I think we saw the infrastructure. So partnerships, setting up the environment. How do we get partnerships? We get them in the different perspectives that I have shown. So that's all I had to say in the 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. We do not want to waste a lot of time. We're going to go to our roundtable discussions, and we're starting with Mr. Gerard Martin. And you will introduce yourself and enjoy we're looking forward to it. I think that one you can switch on. I think it's also.
Oh, but can I use this one? Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gerard Martin. I'm from the wine industry, as you've heard previously, working in R&D and innovation and also in learning and development. And my sort of task this afternoon was given, or the question that I was given was, how important is it to build partnerships for increased investment? Is this on?
But now it's not on. Is it on? Yeah, it's on.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, so as I said, my question was, how important is it to build partnerships to bring increased investment into all of those activities that were mentioned there, and specifically in terms of R&D and innovation, but also in terms of knowledge transfer. So, if you think about winemaking, you think about planting up vineyards, you're thinking about picking of grapes, pressing of grapes, and fermenting the juice to get the wine. That sounds very simple. But I mean, there's a lot that goes into that decision-making processes. And then from an R&D perspective, even much more. So if you look at this complex systemic value chain of the industry, you can understand that you need different skill sets. You need different people to bring forth their expertise on different levels. So it's not so straightforward. It's a complex system. It's a system that needs a lot of deep scientific understanding and knowledge. And I think it's a system that has been defined in our context in terms of partners, how we collaborate as such to bring you a final quality product that you will enjoy later tonight. So, as I've said, I work for WineTech. Now, the name, must I keep the mic a little bit? Yeah. So, WineTech, in its shortest or in the longer form, it is Wine Industry Network of Expertise and Technology. So the emphasis is on network, because that is what we are. We are a network, we are an ecosystem, we are cooperatives in providing you with real research, innovation, and tech transfer, or knowledge transfer as such. And the emphasis is on that because if you think about farmers wants to know, what is the return of my investment when I give you funding? What is the return on investment in a research context? Because there's so many other things that I invest my money in. And we all know the proceeds or the outcomes of research are not really seen in the next year after you've invested in a project. The proceeds or the outcomes can be 10 years later. And that is why farmers are asking, why must I give you money and I only get a result maybe 10 years later that I can take up in my business? But it's important, therefore, to focus on the real things that will make an impact in the lives of producers and in the lives of people within that value chain. And we can't do this alone. We don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the resources, we don't have the laboratories, we don't have the experimental farms, we don't have the gene banks, we don't have the virus gardens. That is all sitting within ancillary institutions and governmental institutions, if you think about it. Within the university, they've got the big money to invest in infrastructure. The ARC has got the money to maintain virus and gene gardens or gene banks. We as industry can just bring our funding and we can bring our specific needs that those institutions could address or can address. So even in knowledge transfer, there's a whole network, and my colleague Conrad Skitter will talk about that. How do we use the network of consultants within the area, within the regions, that can take new knowledge and existing knowledge into the industry? And then my colleague Wendy spoke about our whole development in terms of people development, learning and development. There's a lot happening in that space. And I think from a capacity building and capabilities that are needed, as I've shown you in that previous slide, it's all about bringing that highly scientific skill sets into the sector. And then the one that excites me the most is innovation, and that is quite new for us, because what we've done in the past, we've done R&D. That R&D ended up in a publication, and that is where the value stopped. And the value was not for the industry, the value was for the research community, getting published in highly scientific journals, and they get the credit for that. But what comes back to the industry? And that made us thought we need to really go deeper into understanding what is the real value and how can we translate that value or those ideas into real value. And that is why we've been tasked to build an innovation ecosystem. So funding is always a big thing. And I think we are funded by a statutory levy. There's no way that you can run a whole industry's R&D and innovation and transfer and people development component if you just have statutory levy funding. You need other funding sources, and this is why we leverage with government, we leverage with specific partners in industry, also outside of industry, because remember the wine industry, there's a whole value chain. It's not just about picking grapes and making wine. There's so many other things in that chain that is complementary or ancillary to other sectors in agriculture where we can benefit from specific things. So I think the water crisis in the Cape 2015 to 2018, if you look at this picture, it was quite a shocking thing. But I mean, just like COVID, you can't let a crisis go to waste. There's a lot of opportunity when there are crises, a lot of collective energy, a lot of collective funding, putting behind resources to reach a common objective. And I think that is what the water crisis of a couple of years did. That is what COVID did. And you could see the results out of that. And if you think about it, we've actually done a lot of work with the Water Research Commission, with the ARC, with the university, to, in specific areas, bring down the irrigation water about 50%, but getting the same amount or the same yield and the same quality. So that, just imagine from an economic perspective, your input cost and all the other economic benefits that you can bring to farmers. So it's all in. That is what is needed. When there's a crisis or where there's a problem, we need different perspectives. Innovation happens when you get different minds looking at the same thing and thinking differently. And that is in essence what we are saying from a wine industry perspective. It's not just about people in the industry, it's about people in the potato industry, people in the grain industry that can bring specific context and specific knowledge that can address problems in our sector. And that is why partnerships is absolutely crucial for us in the sector. So innovation, there's so much innovation opportunities from a wine perspective. If you look at this, it's a busy slide, but I think it's technology from terroir to taste, from the soil up to the final product when you taste it and when you enjoy it. And in that space, there's so much technologies that feeds into that, not coming from a wine perspective per se. Engineering, industrial engineering, psychologists, all of that feeds into in terms of our outcomes and in terms of the value proposition that we can have for the industry. But I think my colleague yesterday, Christo Conradi, also said, data is so important. And I think we've heard the term data is the new oil, but then it needs to be data in the right format, not garbage in and garbage out. You need credible data sources, and you need to understand how your data relates in terms of other data, because there's a lot of people looking at problems from different angles, and how do those data sets talk to each other. And how do we mine their data sets? I'm sure you've all played around with ChatGPT now and seen what open innovation, open AI can bring to the table. How does that look 3 to 5 years from now? The real value in understanding from different perspectives how we can really solve problems. And I think that is where the sort of magic lies for us as an industry, to really work with other sectors and collectively looking at specific problems. So we need to focus in the industry, and I think from an innovation perspective, we've focused on specific themes. The whole climate sustainability is quite a big theme in our sector. And I think what is important for us, if you look through that middle circles, it's about how do you turn data into information, into knowledge, and into wisdom, with the end goal being a sustainable and profitable farming sector, in this case, wine. And I think if you look at all of those focus areas, I'm sure it is topics that you are also looking at. And how do we collectively, what the technologies that are available, not exploit, but use that technologies to provide us with real solutions. Can you move to the clicker? Okay, so my last slide in terms of innovation is something that we did in the sector, and I mentioned it earlier about in the early days we invested in R&D that ended up in publications. And I think for us it was, how do we turn ideas into value, real value for the industry? And there was no playbook for this from a wine perspective. In our minds it was about, how do we give commercial application to academic outcomes? Now, if you talk to academics about this, there's some that will say, I will gladly jump into this entrepreneurial journey. And then there are others who will say, this entrepreneurial journey is not for me, but I want the benefit of solutions. We will get the right people. We will get the right people to drive that in terms from an entrepreneurial perspective. And that is what we call entrepreneurial in residence programs, where we take entrepreneurs, real entrepreneurs, that can give outcome and solution using your IP and exploiting that, in translating that into value. So what we do from an industry perspective, we say, out of your idea, let's really go and understand what is the real value. And sometimes it's a timing issue. We've heard many occasions of specific outcomes of technology and applications. It wasn't the right time. And sometimes it's not something that farmers will pay for. So what's the use? You can have the best idea, but if no one is willing to pay for that idea, rather go solve that idea. Maybe you'll find that application could become, in a couple of years, there'll be value for it. But it's understanding and scoping and really going into the phase of where you see the real value is and taking that value and unlocking other investment. So we all know there's not a lot of seed investment in South Africa. So that is that early stage investment when nobody thinks your idea will work. And this is where we say, we will invest if we think there's real value. And within our network, we can then attract other funders. And I think this is where a real opportunity lies for agricultural bodies to collect. We've heard about pipeline. There's not a lot of pipeline. Maybe there's a pipeline in your environment. How do we bring that into this? Because this, again, is not about wine. It's about agriculture as such. Agri-tech, not wine tech in this case. So I think from our perspective, you see the value of partnerships is crucial for us to get to the R&D outcomes, to get to the innovation outcomes, to get to the knowledge transfer for the industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. I'm sure there's going to be a great deal of discussions later this evening. If you make it to the wine he was referring to. The next speaker on my agenda is Dr. Lutfred Kisoli from the RD University in Tanzania. You're welcome. Perhaps try this one. And it's apparently just holding it like this and not too close to that area. Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me try first if it works. Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name's Lutfred Kisoli. I'm at the university in Dar es Salaam called RD University. And I have been also part of the team that has been implementing the TISA project, a project that you have heard quite a bit yesterday and also today. So my presentation will highlight some of the experiences from the TISA project, but really focusing on the contribution of partnerships in transforming small-scale irrigation in southern Tanzania. I'm saying southern Tanzania because this is the part where we have worked with the TISA project. And these experiences will be drawing from the Iringa region. And just to give you a bit of context, we talk of this TISA project, which is transforming irrigation in Southern Africa. And it's a project that started since 2013 for Tanzania. And you have heard a bit about it, but then maybe just to also highlight that we talk of Iringa, which the region in blue there, which is a region that is in the Southern Highlands and located in the southwestern part of the country. Now, with the TISA project, it used a two-pronged approach, and this is the discussion that has been here since yesterday on the tools and the AIPs, the agricultural innovation platforms. Now, for my presentation today, I'll focus more on the AIPs. And basically, we know that from Martin's presentation that these are platforms or forums that bring together stakeholders, stakeholders from diverse aspects of the value chain within agriculture, but then those who share a common interest. And they come together, they interact, they engage, and of course, within this dialogue, they address some of the challenges that they face in the system. So how did they start in Tanzania? In 2014, two AIPs, so these platforms were established. One in the two irrigation schemes, one called Magozi and one called Kiwere. So two scheme level AIPs were established in 2014, and then this, of course, brings together stakeholders around, of course, the scheme, the farmers themselves, and other stakeholders. I'll show you in the next slide. But then, from these scheme level AIPs, then in 2017, one district level AIP was also established, and this, of course, brought together a number of stakeholders, but really broadened up to include around 10 schemes. Now, okay, yeah, so These AIPs that we've been talking about, as we said, they foster these continued interactions and, of course, engagement with stakeholders. For the case of Iringa region, where we have been working, several of these stakeholders included the district council itself, which, of course, played a key role to link, of course, not only other government entities like the ward level, regional secretariat and others, but also in sort of coordinating other stakeholders as well. And then we have agricultural research institutes. So we have what is called ARIs in Tanzania. These are cultural research institutes, and one that was very much involved is from Dakawa, which of course partly facilitated issues to do with training, education, access to inputs and the like. And of course, there are financial organizations, and here we're talking of banks. Several of these have been part of the process, of the AIP process, and of course have been very instrumental in enabling access to finance by the farmers. Also, there are NGOs, several of them, some dealing with farmer training, some with setting up really in the schemes, setting up demonstration plots, etc. And of course, there are other also stakeholders around marketing, and this sometimes, of course, is individuals, but also companies, and not only linking farmers to markets, but also providing some of the technical or training into things around post-harvest handling, storage, and the like. And of course, not to forget about input suppliers. They've been very critical in this AIP process. And of course, the farmers themselves, who are the main sort of stakeholders in the entire process. So when you look at these varied, these different stakeholders and the kinds of activities that go through the platform, you get a sense of the sort of partnerships that have been created, and of course, in trying to address various aspects, various issues around irrigation development. Now, the question will be, what has been the outcome? What has been the outcome of these sorts of partnerships that have been created over time? And several outcomes that we have witnessed over time revolve around the aspects of inputs, for example, through the linkages that have been formed with several of these input suppliers. Farmers have been able to access quality inputs, because some of the discussions in these platforms were the challenges that farmers face, not only in accessing inputs, but also in accessing quality inputs. So when you have in a platform, you have people from input supplier companies, you have experts in agronomy, and you have the farmers themselves, you have people from the government. Some of these discussions led to improvements, or contributed to improvements in accessing these inputs. In one of the schemes, there was a local input store that was set up close to the scheme, just as an output from this process. And of course, there are arrangements such as bulk procurement that have been made possible because of the partnerships created. The other is around agronomic knowledge, because through the of course the AIPs, and the demonstration plots that were set up, the several study visits that were done. This really sort of contributed to enhancing farmer agronomic knowledge, and it has been really useful to farmers. And the moment now when you go and talk to them, you can really feel the sense of understanding that they have as an outcome of this process. And another one is around water access and irrigation infrastructure. And here I wanted to highlight only two things, two examples rather. So in one scheme called Magozi, because of the AIPs, the discussions, the interactions, they were able to have support from the government. So through the Iringa District Irrigation Development Fund, they were able to access around 200 million Tanzanian shillings to expand their intake, the intake of the scheme. And of course, farmers also contributed a bit, around 14 million. But of course, this was made possible because of the engagement, the continuous engagement through the AIP process. And of course, also they were able to have the Rufiji Basin Water Board increasing the water permit. So previously, they had a permit allowing them to draw around 0.6 cubic meter per second, and this was raised to around 2.0 cubic meters per second. So these are some of the contributions that we see as outcomes of this process. And of course, others include access to markets, in which several of these schemes benefited from this process, in which warehouses were built, storage warehouse was built, and of course rice mills, and of course you look at the slide, the value of this, which is of course substantial, and it was made possible because of course not only of the engagements, but also the confidence that these partners or these stakeholders had in what the farmers were doing. And of course, in terms of finance, access to finance, we have one bank called CRDB that has been advancing loans. Others are also joining in. And several of these schemes, you see Tunga Malenga, Idodi, Magozi, etc., accessing quite some amount of money in terms of loans. And the last sort of outcome that we can also attribute to these engagements and partnerships is on scheme management, in which through the process, through the AIP process, farmers, of course, and different stakeholders managed to undertake participatory mapping. They were also able, the two schemes, Magozi and Kiwere, they were able to revise their constitutions. And of course, because of this, they are now much better in terms of organizing, planning, and of course, managing their schemes. So overall, the point I was trying to make is that because of the AIP process, different partnerships have been formed, and of course these are ongoing. And as we speak now, several of these are ongoing linkages to other institutions, financial institutions, linkages to new input suppliers, to new markets. This process that is ongoing, and of course it has been very, very beneficial. I think with that I say thank you and asante sana.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker, and And I just want to be mindful of the time. It's an afternoon session, so please, speakers, help us. I'm sure the audience still wants to get through a lot of questions. The next speaker is Dr. Mario Chilundu, Universidad Eduardo Mondlane. I hope I said that right, University of Eduardo Mondlane. Thank you. If you can please hold it down there so we don't block the sound. Yeah. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, thank you, Chair, for the time. My name is Mario Chilundu. I'm from Eduardo Mondlane University, but I'm currently also attached to the National Irrigation Institute. And my presentation to you today, it draws a bit of my experience managing irrigation schemes. Let me first highlight my title. Well, it's a sort of reflection whether the PPPs it's the right model for smallholder irrigation management in Mozambique. Let me also define the scene. We see this morning a presentation that the definition of smallholder is rather different from our context. What we call smallholder is basically, farmers with areas lower than 2 hectares. So this makes a little bit different in terms of context, for instance, in comparison to what we have seen this morning for South Africa. Well, this is my presentation outline. But before I move on, I just wanted to set again the context of the country. We have over 3 million hectares of land suitable for irrigation. And we have seen yesterday that despite the fact that we do have such enormous potential in Africa, less than 10% of this area is developed. This is not different in Mozambique. Out of this area, only about 6% it's currently irrigated. But in order for us to think about sustainable infrastructures, we basically need to think about pragmatic and innovative, public, private-public partnerships. Why are we saying that? Well, currently we do have PPPs well recognized in our national irrigation program. Also, we do have other legal framework that complement and recognize the need to promote PPPs to improve the management and the sustainability of the infrastructures. But what is the state of the art today? Let me also mention that in Mozambique, basically the majority of all the infrastructures, irrigation infrastructures, are promoted by the government, are public infrastructures. But what happens is that there is actually a low commitment on our ownership by the beneficiaries. Why is that happening? Mostly it's because of this traditional top-down approach by which, the infrastructures are developed. And we end up having or seeing a lot of these areas being abandoned. We also have, together with this promotion, with this development of infrastructures, we have the promotion of farmers association. When we say farmers association here, we should understand as a group of people that come together just to receive the infrastructure. That also we have seen as a factor that undermines, the sustainability and how successful these infrastructures then are later managed. A very few cases whereby, the water delivery system are sort of free. What we mean there with the free is that there's no need to engage pumping and all sort of motor pumps to withdraw water, basically the gravity system. That's where you have a sort of success and sustainable systems in terms of the operation. And also, we do have situation whereby the management of this infrastructure is still done by the government itself, by companies, of course, running with the public funds. And also there you can see that things are working despite the fact there's a continued investment that is happening behind that you cannot quickly perceive. But then how then the PPPs have been supporting the sustainable smallholder irrigation in Mozambique? A few examples that I wanted to highlight here. We have first what we call commercial farmers, as a private irrigation operator. What are those? Basically, you have big companies coming into the country. They invest mostly to promote certain group of crops of interest, mostly cash crops. And they provide, for instance, input, training, and other support to farmers. But what we have seen in the country for the last years is that whenever there is a change in the market conditions for these commodities, for these crops, likely the system collapses. We have an example of the Vanduzi company, which used to promote, for instance, baby corn in central region. Once the price of this product went down in the international market, so farmers were left with tons, with even hectares, of baby corn, and they didn't know what to do. So this has a direct implication also on their income, and of course on how they manage their systems. As I mentioned, we have also the public company managing the schemes. These public companies are responsible for the main distribution system, and the farmers are likely to look after the tertiary network system. This is supposed also to work. However, because it's a public company managing the primary infrastructure, that also tends to collapse because of the fatherhood approach. I mean, farmers perceive these public companies as being, managed by the government, and they see the government as their father, and they are not actually supposed to contribute for what is being done there. On the other hand, we have also the provision of assistance that is done by other group of stakeholders, like NGOs, for instance, but mostly focusing on the operation and maintenance. This group now offers farmers all sort of training. They help to improve associativism, and also they provide training in terms of production and also the commercialization of their products. We bring here some examples of Gaza Works, Gapi Oram, and Resilience. Those are some of these NGOs that are currently doing this kind of work in assisting the farmers on their daily operation and maintenance of their systems. Well, what are the challenges for the success of PPPs in Mozambique? I brought the two. I always argued that there is no way a private entity can step into an irrigation scheme if not clear what is going to get back, of its investment. So therefore, the issue of irrigation infrastructure concession, it's still a problem in Mozambique. Mostly, as I mentioned, we have the public infrastructure, but there's no clear regulation how then this private entity can step into these schemes. Also, there's the issue of supporting infrastructures. Most of our schemes They're of course located in places where you have resources in terms of land and water. But then this is not complemented, for instance, with a good network, of roads and electricity, which, for instance, are seen as important commodities for the private sector, to engage on investment on irrigation schemes. Well, my two last slides, I just brought, again, a reflection. Can we consider different models? Well, we have seen from yesterday's presentations out of the TISA and FAZIMO projects. Well, FAZIMO standing for Farm-Led Smallholder Irrigation Project, Mozambique. What we did there, we could see, for instance, that reduction in irrigation costs and increased productivity, it's a reality by engaging farmers, either using tools, AIP, as it was mentioned in today's sessions as well. But then the issue now is the farmers have shown, for instance, the willingness to adopt tools. We start working with them because we need to provide them with the tools. But this now became a problem because we did not have a clear chain. We did not have the right partners stepping forward to provide the tools. But what's happening currently is that we managed to have a partnership established with a local company that will provide tools locally. However, the issue that is still there is the issue of the costs. If you remember, for Tanzania, for instance, the price is the double. So in Mozambique, probably it may not be different. So we need to think about alternative of how to lower the cost, probably by engage local irrigation sites of about 6 hectares each. What I wanted to bring here as a success story of this intervention is that the cost per hectare of this investment was about $2,000 to 5,000, sorry. And these systems have been established about 12 to 15 years ago, and they're still operating, meaning that the way the funds are made available, to the investors, to the smallholder farmer, also contributes a lot to the success, that we see. My last slide basically is a sort of recommendation that maybe we should shift from top-down approaches to demand-driven. We have seen success stories now coming out from, for instance, Rwanda, whereby, this is the approach that is being promoted. Government switching from an implementing agency to more monitoring and evaluation entity. There we want to see the government, going after and maybe working with potential partners to raise funds, But then they have to set a clear mechanism, of funding, which we consider had to be an indirect funding or provision of the funds to the farmers. The requirement for joint and affordable initiative between private sector and smallholder farmers, that's also very important. We need to set, how then this partnership can work. We all advocate about partnership. We could see, for instance, one mechanism here, which is the AIPs that seems to work, but still we need to think further about it. One issue and last that I wanted to highlight that has not been addressed during this dialogue has to do with insurance. We are in a climate change scenario. All of us, we recognize that, but no one here mentioned the need, for instance, to start thinking about insurance for agriculture. Why not? Insurance for irrigated infrastructures. Mozambique is located a downstream position for most of the basins that we have seen even now. So definitely we need to think about, insurance also as a way of safeguarding the recovery after we are hit by extreme events. So this is what I have to share with you. Thank you very much.
We have started the session a little bit late because we were waiting to switch over from Eskom to the generator. So, and yes, every speaker, we tend not to interrupt people because the messages are important. You've traveled far. So please just mind with us. I know it's the afternoon session, but it's quite important to get the gist of the matters of each speaker. But please, speakers, if I can also sensitize you just to the time issue. We still want to do a Q&A as well. The next speaker, Dr. Vuyo Majimba from Acting Coordinator, the African Institute of South Africa. Welcome.
Thank you.
If you can just hold the mic at the bottom so it doesn't block the sound. Yes.
Good afternoon. You are looking at me, all of you are looking at me so serious, like, don't take life serious like you are going to get out of it alive. My presentation is not very technical. I'm just going to make it simple because I believe in one acronym, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Keep it simple. That's the issue. That's the quick message. So I'm just going to make it very simple because when it's simple, I understand it. I'm not very intelligent. So I want to keep it simple. Which one is the right? So this is my overview here. I'll be talking to you about those of you who go to church or whatever religion, you are told the same thing from the day you are born or first time you understand until you die. So I'm just going to repeat what you know. So the idea here is to reinforce what we know. I think you are told that to reinforce what we know. So what I have here, colleagues, is I'm supposed to talk about partnerships. And I've got a question. What are the social and institutional preconditions required for transformative partnerships to take advantage of investment opportunities? I'm going to be very generic, but I'm going to give you practical examples. First of all, let's know what is a partnership. We always say, this is my partner. You get into liaison with somebody, there's a company can be an entity yourself, so that you got mutual benefits. We're all adults here. We've seen many partnerships, from marriage to drinking partners, from everything. So we're going there for a mutual benefit. And I've got one response. For me, when I look at partnerships, when I look at the question, I have to say, I can't say it's a precondition. For me, those conditions are a means to an end. They are both a result of getting the partnership, of wanting the partnership, and a result of the partnership. I hope I'm making sense there. But if it doesn't, if it's not as clear as water, if it's as clear as mud, it will be as clear as water soon. I'm going backward. Now, I look at it, I say preconditions are both a means and an end to this issue. That's my view. You may have your own, but let me try and convince you of my view. Now, oh God. When I'll start talking, I usually can talk without this thing. I don't have my glasses. Oh, Jesus Christ. Now, when we look at this, when you are going to go into a partnership, what do? You've got three phases that I've distinguished. There are three. The first one, you want to initiate a partnership. How do you initiate a partner? You must have a clear reason why you want that partnership. Those who are married know what I'm talking about. Those who are dating also know what I'm talking about. These days, partners that you are present, why are you talking to me? I always say taxi drivers have got these are matatu, the dala, they've got the most beautiful girlfriends because they can send the message straight home. Those of us who are sophisticated start waffling. Why do I want the partnership? Let's be clear from the beginning. Let's not mince our word. So you have got to have your clear goals. When you've got your clear goals, you've also got your clear expectation from what you will provide for what you want and what the other person should provide for what you want to benefit. Very clear. Everyone is talking about the partnerships in agriculture. We have seen, I think there's a very good example for Australia when they were talking about water rights. The government, when they entered with companies for water rights, they were not clear. As a result, water has been commoditized in Australia. Farmers are closing, dairy farms are closing because water is now, for the water traders in the water market, is about profits, not about agriculture. So the partnership with the water company was not clear. Others wanted money, the government wanted agriculture. The result, farmers are closing. So know why you need a partner is my message. Know it. Now, Jesus. Now, the phase 2 is establish agreements on all your operating principles with your partner. Know that. Establish the ground rules right before you enter it. I've just given that example. And right now we're talking about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And we link it to agriculture. We saw Wamgele Mene came here. He was talking about Southern Africa being a hub of agriculture. We'll need partners for seeds. He was talking about wine. What do you want from the guys who produce the wine caps? It's coincidental, I know a lot about the value chains as well. And it's one of my things. What do you want? What type of want? We've been taking our wine to Europe to package it. They're taking jobs away from South Africa to Europe. Is that the partnership we want? Why are we in a poor negotiating conditions? And we call it partnership when we're reading the news. We say we're in a partnership with the UK to package our wine in the UK. It's not true. We've been arm-twisted because right from the beginning, we did not know what we wanted. We went in there for trade only. We did not go for trade that produces jobs. And this is the challenge that we have in Africa in all the things that we're talking about. We're going to partnerships. We have heard the incidents of the African Union, which the African Union building was built by the Chinese, who put something to spy on all our messages because we're not very clear. Kudos to the Chinese, they were very clever because they knew what they wanted, but we did not know what we wanted. So what you need to do is make sure in your partnership, you and your partners have got matching values and matching mission statements. What do you want to achieve? If you don't have that, you have failed. So here I'm talking about developing the partnership. Don't rush to sign. African governments have a tendency of signing. We love signing. We will sign anything that comes in front of us, and we'll have a photo moment for that. I'm sorry if there's a politician, but I'm trying to be as pragmatic as possible. We just love signing. Now, the last stage that I'm going to talk about is the maintenance of a partnership. Now, for you to maintain a partnership, each partner must have a legitimate voice. We're talking about, in South Africa, about GBV, gender-based violence, because certain genders don't want other genders to have a voice. I don't know, because I need to be politically correct for now. But ask me when the wine is flowing, I'll tell you the truth. So allow each partner to participate as well. And the final thing that I want to say before I go to my last slide is that review partnership. Nothing is concrete. Those of you who are beginning to gray, there was a car, a BMW car called a Cheetah in the 70s. If you remember it, hands up those who remember it. I don't want to embarrass you about your age. That was the best car I'd ever seen. I saw the same car 2 years ago. Oh my God, it looks horrible compared to the new BMW. But it started, it was the first one. BMW has been renewing its cars. So renew your agreements with the aim of improving them. So don't go there and sign what we have seen in other countries where you sign, like the Francophone countries that have signed and say we'll keep our reserves in France. And when we want them, we borrow them in our reserves. The cocoa from Cote d'Ivoire exported, the reserves are in France. When Cote d'Ivoire wants their reserves, they go and borrow them from France, and France earns the interest. So be careful what you sign. That's a fact. If there's anybody who is Francophone in the room, I'm sorry, but that's the truth. So I'm going to conclude very soon. I just said I was going to. So always know, it's not static, it's dynamic. In any negotiation, my brother spoke about the issues in Tanzania that were happening, all those agreements, none of them is permanent because the dynamics will change, market dynamics will change. You know, when we are talking about agricultural commodities, declining terms of trade, price volatility that we are talking about, we're not there. So we cannot go for a static agreement and say we concluded it in 1962 and we are stuck with it. So I want to conclude my message and say, for me, there is no precondition. The condition is evolving. It is both an end and a means. You need to think 360 degrees. You need to be able, there's a concept that we all know, the concept of socio-technical imaginaries. Imagine what you want. Imagine how you'll get there. And as the picture changes, you know the concept of a mirage. As the picture changes, adjust your screen. So my last words is that there's something that says, the optimist, the pessimist sits there and blames the wind. The optimist thinks, hopes the wind will change. That is in sailing. But the pragmatic guy adjusts the sails of his boat and catches the very little wind and starts moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that thought-provoking presentation. Our next speaker is Mr. Konrad Schutte, Manager Technical Services at Winpro. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be quick. I'm on a timer over here, so give me 8 or 9 minutes and I will be finished. First of all, thank you for the invitation from the inviters. It's really nice being part of this important dialogue. So I'm going to present to you the South African wine grape industry leadership in sustainable water management and specifically give you a perspective on building partnerships from Winpro's side, which is a non-state actor. So maybe just to give you a bit of background on Winpro, Winpro represents about 2,500 wine grape growers in South Africa. So Winpro represents those grape growers on all levels with all stakeholders, including government. And we will look at all themes for that wine grape growers to improve their profitability and also sustainability. So within my presentation, I'm mostly going to focus on knowledge transfer. So within that knowledge transfer examples, it will relate to irrigation. And so bear with me for the next 8 minutes. So those are the big ticket items for the South African wine industry up on the screen. If I compile this slide, I would probably put climate, which is currently at the bottom over there, at the top, because it is really critical. And to give you an idea, the South African wine industry produces on an annual basis about 1.4 million tons of grapes. So that is distributed across 11 different wine growing regions on about 90,000 hectares of wine grapes. And in the really dry seasons of 2019 and 18, that production figures fell with about 15%. So that was 220,000 tons of wine grapes out of the system for 2 years. Luckily, in the year of 2000, we recovered with only 10% less. So we were also quite amazed to see that there's a long-term effect on the grapevine before it came back after the drought. Now, the examples that I'm going to give you, or maybe firstly, just to finish off with a slide, you will see on the left, that's a dead vineyard, and on the right-hand side, that's a really nice vineyard. So that's up in the Olifant River in the dry period. So within that period, producers actually had to do a water budget and decide to whom vineyards are they going to irrigate. So are they going to irrigate to the top blocks and the newly planted blocks? And this producer could not irrigate all blocks, and that vineyard actually died because of water issues. So if you stand in front of a vineyard like that, you do realize that partnership is indeed critical, and I think this is why dialogues like this is so important, to learn from each other and also share knowledge. So some of the partnerships that we work on, the first example that I'm going to give you is Gen Z. So Gen Z is an indication of a young generation. It's vineyards that we're busy planting right now. It's technology that should be available for the young people coming into the industry. And the idea behind Gen Z is to generate and transfer relevant information towards producers. It is to aid informed decision making, to adopt better management practices, and also to assist producers in achieving their sustainability goals. So within this specific project, we did partner and collaborate with various role players. So you can see on the screen lots of names. I think the key players over here is Stellenbosch University, and then also their Department of Agricultural Sciences. So within that project, we worked together and we planted 5 hectares or 4.5 hectares of vineyards at their training facilities in Stellenbosch. And you can see over there anything from table grapes, raisin grapes. We have different rootstock cultivars, clones, pruning systems. Then we have a winemaking block over there as well, irrigation trial, different row directions, and also different training systems or trellis systems. That is going to have effect on irrigation and the water need of grapevines. Now, the exciting thing about this project is a lot of young people are coming through, so it's definitely a good engagement with the youth. And as the Honourable Minister said yesterday, there is a flag up for women within agriculture, and I'm really happy to report I spoke to Erna Blankert, which is the lecturer at Stellenbosch University yesterday, and she told me about 60% of the students that do visit this facility is indeed women. Then we did do a similar exercise at Boland Agricultural College. So they are between Paarl and Wellington, so it's a smaller site. You can see there's about 21 different red varieties and 19 white varieties. The idea again is to show high school pupil how grapevines work and what the effect of irrigation practices could be over there. Again, we did not do this alone. We worked with the school over there and lots of other input suppliers. Then most of you have a research background, as I gathered from all the speeches. And I think something that all of you are very familiar with, if you go to a producer and tell them, listen here, this is what we found in this trial, they will typically tell you, yes, but on my property it works a little bit different. So we typically see that in South Africa, you can go to the US, you can go to Europe, and that would be a typical answer. So we decided to take the research, or rather demonstration blocks, towards the producers. So this is a list of demonstration trials that we have in producers' commercial vineyards. So over there you can see we have different, we have the, whoa, now I'm just going back, sorry. So we have different cultivar demos, different clones, different rootstocks, and different trailer systems. So currently we have about 50 different demonstration plots within producer vineyards, and we are gathering that data as well. Yesterday, Dr. Theo de Jager touched on the importance of soil health. So this is an important part of the Gen Z project, where we do cover crops in between the vineyards. So typically we will plant that in April and work that back into the vineyard in the month of September, depending on the need of the vineyard. But over there you can see different trials that we are doing with different combinations. And the idea over there is to suppress weed, to get a good biomass and also increase the soil health over time. Again, not something that we can do on our own. You can see lots of partnerships that we do have over there, especially WineTech, that's always walking a road with us, and then also seed suppliers of Barenbrug and Agricol. Obviously, we are capturing all of this information, so it is available on the Gen Z website as well. Then the next example, my second example, is Vinpro Technical Farm Worker Training. So it's been a journey. That journey started in 2009. I'm not going to go through all the detail, but I think a big milestone within that whole journey was in 2014, we launched a DVD training pack. Now in 2014, DVDs were quite cool, and we thought that would be a really good thing to put out in the industry, and it did work really well. So within that DVD pack, there is all kinds of training material, from pruning vineyards, definitely irrigation, all the way up to harvest, 10 different modules. The market actually told us, listen, yeah, you cannot bring the DVDs to us. We also need some practical training. So from that period, we trained more than 5,600 people in that 7 years. And during the COVID time, we did realize it's time to take this platform online. So the next slide, I'm going to show you our online training platform that we are also doing in partnership with WineTech's People Development that put in a lot of time and effort in here. But over there you can see that's the website. Again, the different modules, including irrigation. So this entails that a person from that facility would come to the Winpro office. They will receive training and go back to that farm or the property, and then they would become the trainer for that environment to train people how to use this platform and then also give us feedback. So we launched this in October last year, and I'm really excited about that. But again, you can see we did not do that on our own. Lots of logos over there: WineTech, Falco, Vititech, AgriCeta, Department of Western Cape, and we are really thankful for their contributions. Then, to be mindful of time, this is my last slide. So the example that I'm going to give you over there is again our service level agreement, or our collaboration with the South African Wine Industry Transformation Unit. So Wendy spoke this morning, and it is really important for us to provide good service towards transformation projects. So in that system, you can see from the year 2020, that is the amount of projects that we are doing technical consultation on. I think it is really critical, again, we're not doing that on ourselves. We are capturing that information of every farm visit on a system from Farm MS, Christus Spies that talked yesterday, just to ensure that everything is captured and we can do good traceability on this project. And I think two of the examples that I might highlight over here is in the dry periods, we definitely learned that site selection is absolutely crucial. Remember, we are working with a long-term crop, or it can be 20, 25 years in the ground. So in terms of selecting the correct site on a property, we do help the transformation projects on that quite a bit, and we had good success with that. And then also soil preparation. So I think South Africa is indeed leaders in terms of soil preparation, where we have really good information to do deep soil preparation up to 1.2 meters deep, about 60 centimeters apart, to give a really big tank to capture winter rainfall, to create a buffer in the drier seasons. And that is some of the information that we do give back to the transformation projects. And it's really interesting to see how they are growing at this stage. So maybe just to end off, I would like to say thank you for your time. And I think the previous speaker really summed up my summary, because I wanted to say, in terms of partnerships, I really think you should look into getting something that's mutually beneficial to both parties. You should treat each other with respect. And obviously, like with all relationships, everything does not usually go according to plan. But if something like that happens, it's usually a good time to get in your car, get on an airplane, and go and sit across a table and discuss and decide if you need to set yourselves in another direction to keep everybody happy and to add value to the industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Skutte, considering how Dr. Peterson is doing, you might just won the award this afternoon to sticking to your time.
You've won the award. Thank you very much for this opportunity. What I'm going to speak about is the role of transboundary aquifers and river basin organizations in boosting climate-smart investments. So my presentation is a resource perspective that I do have. I work for SADC GMI, and basically our business is trying to understand transboundary aquifers and also try to see how we can set up the institutional arrangements within river basin organizations to manage our transboundary aquifers. Now, as Conrad has vividly illustrated, the impact of water on the grape crops and the value of water, our business basically is to see what partnership we can establish with producers. So groundwater is found throughout Africa, and our current understanding is that it's evolving in terms of how much groundwater is available. And a lot of work that we do is trying to understand the resource. So transboundary aquifers is basically aquifers that basically contain groundwater that transfer from one country to others. It is the largest store of liquid fresh water, and particularly in arid regions is locally available as water supplies in regions. The problems for transboundary groundwater systems include resource depletion through overuse pollution on either side of a border, disparate resource utilization across an international border, high uncertainty in estimating yields, or the amount of water that can be withdrawn, and also other aquifer properties. So why transboundary aquifers? Transboundary aquifers normally transect with borderland communities. Now, in those communities, we find that it's mostly vulnerable communities, high proportion of women and youth. In many parts of Africa, it's areas where internally displaced people and refugees occur, and frequently it's forgotten communities. These areas or communities have water shocks and stresses, which include drought, flooding, disease, water shortages, quality issues, food shortages, pests. Also, in many areas of Africa, state collapse or crisis occur. This is just a dug well where we were in Mozambique on the border, where basically this community uses this specific water well for water supply. So, unfortunately for groundwater, if you look at the climate change literature or the IPC documents, they frequently use depletion of groundwater resources as a reason for maladaptation, or as an example of maladaptation. And this has led to a global dialogue or narrative that groundwater is unsustainable. And the reason for this is water depletion in many parts of the world, driven by groundwater irrigation. So, for example, in the USA, Southeast China, you basically had a boom phase of groundwater development, which has resulted in overdevelopment. And they've now reached what they call a maturation phase, where they now have to look at how do they pull back their groundwater use. But in Sub-Saharan Africa, we haven't reached the trigger phase. We have not used our groundwater resources. So we believe as groundwater practitioners that groundwater can be a foundational resource for development in Africa. The issue is not groundwater depletion. The issue is poverty and underdevelopment, and that should be our focus. So what we try to do is try to understand water storage. Particularly, we're trying to understand aquifer systems, and we're trying to understand green infrastructure. In the past, there was an over-reliance on grey infrastructure. And with our kind of new thinking is how do we use the natural storage in terms of overcoming the issue of climate adaptation. And so we work on things related to landscapes and watershed, managed aquifer recharge systems in terms of increased water availability, flood mitigation, and also regulating flows. So why RBOs and aquifer boundaries? Because RBOs are the preferred vehicle to promote key facets of groundwater management and protection. And this map is just a transboundary aquifer system. It's called the Eastern Kalahari Route Transboundary Aquifer System, shared between Zimbabwe and Botswana. And in this system, you've got that overlaps those river basin organizations. So our role is to see how do we establish institutional arrangements to support this river basin organizations. So the role of groundwater in a resilient future is focusing on increasing water access and supplies through conjunctive use, reducing water demand. We need to focus on how do we store water and how do we use nature-based solutions in terms of storing water, and then also transporting water. From our perspective, water storage is at the heart of climate change adaptation. So my last slide, maybe I won the prize, is looking beyond the fence line to improve water systems and management. The issue of monitoring systems and groundwater monitoring system has been highlighted and is critical. We've worked on groundwater drought hotspot mapping and trying to identify those areas, the issue of conjunctive management, the issue of nature-based solutions, and then the all-important issue of investment in knowledge, production, and turning it into wisdom, as been alluded to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. You're certainly sharing the prize with Mr. Skitter. I know it's late, and when I started this session, I have not done a proper introduction of myself. So, my name is Marinda Visser, and I work for a platform called Innovation Africa, which is a research investment platform based at the University of Pretoria, and we do everything that all these speakers were talking about. So it's exciting to hear from colleagues what they're busy with and what they're trying to do to partner, to be innovative, to get technologies to the end user, whether it's a consumer, a farmer, but at the heart of all of this is water. And how do we storage water? The storage of water, innovations behind storing water, because if we don't have water security, we don't have food security. We can't export, we can't have anything. So now it's time to open up for questions, and the floor is yours, the audience, please. And the speakers are waiting. Questions up there and one here. How do we do with the mics? Perhaps I'll give the mic to the... I'll leave this one over here.
Thank you, presenters, for sharing your insights with us. The first question will go to the presenter who talked about the public-private partnerships, giving an example of Mozambique. I wish to know what the experience is like for Mozambique, drawing from my example in Uganda in water, community-based water management. The public partnership, while it's probably an alternative of increasing water coverage, but it is less lucrative for the private sector because of the community's unwillingness to contribute to water. But also secondly, depending on the context, especially weak regulatory framework, there is a tendency for private sector to exploit the water users. Then to the presenter, the one who gave the fascinating one on the prerequisites, preconditions for partnership. Yes, I appreciate that we should know what we want, But I was wondering, doesn't the context differ? For instance, when you talk about a man and wife, probably that is different from a donor and recipient relationship. Is it possible for a beggar to have a choice? For instance, you gave an example of the African Union building. Who built it? Is it possible that you beg someone to build it and you set the conditions for how it should be done and what shouldn't be done? Thank you.
Well, in fact, I would say you are right on one hand. This high possibility of private entity exploiting the end users of water. But on my reflection, the thoughts that I bring is that we need basically to set the ground. We need to set the regulation. We need to set the mechanisms in which this sort of relationship, this sort of partnership would work, avoiding, for instance, such a situation. But also, on the other hand, I wanted to highlight that we need partnerships. We need to improve the way the water is managed, the way the irrigation infrastructures is managed. So, and sort of say, we have, of course, to try and build this sort of partnership, but of course trying as much as we can, to avoid such situation whereby private entity might try and, benefit more than what the end users could. We could hear from the other presenters here that what we need actually is a win-win situation, and this is what it should be promoted. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. I could talk until the guys come home about this issue. Yes, there is power asymmetries that we talk about. But one thing that Africa has never exercised is its right to say no to a bad deal. Now, there is what we call on the China-Africa relations, is what we call the Angola experience in oil, and it's not in agriculture, but I want to show you the power of saying no. When the Chinese wanted to, during the commodity cycle boom, when the Chinese wanted to exploit the Angolan oil, they wanted to put Chinese standard, and Angola said no, because it would have locked Angola into selling only to China. And they said no. And China relented. And they followed what Angola did. So I'm giving an example. So what is wrong with us saying no and walking away from a deal and seeing what is going to happen? It's just that we cannot hold our nerve. This is practical examples. Look at how many rights. There is a very interesting book on mining written by Bonnie Campbell. He talks about a race to the bottom. We start competing about giving concessions to the investor. We start saying, okay, I'll give you. Tanzania is a very good example on their mining development agreement on the 1998 one. They gave away rights to even not develop backward linkages in Tanzania. They were even importing water, the guys that came and built some of those mines. Bottled water was being imported from South Africa because the buyers wanted that. I think you know that. But when we came in and we started talking about it under the Making the Most of Commodities program, people did not listen for 10 years. But now they've changed that rule and they're saying they're doing. So let's exercise the power to say no. We are as more powerful than we think we are with our resources. Most of the European countries have used up their land, contaminated their lands. They want to come here. Saudi Arabia is getting land from us in Kenya, planting for their agriculture, but we cannot say no because we want oil. That is a resource, but the land, that is what you call this, a resource that gets not a finite resource, but the land is infinity. It can be used continuously. I'm mixing my terms there. So I don't want to stretch. When have we said no and negotiated and not rushed?
Interesting presentation and discussion, and with regard to if we are going to look for the success in partnership,
I think we must build on our previous success and failure also in this. We can see in many African countries, we can see we have, for example, in Egypt, we have before many water user association, and we can find also in others. And for public-private partnership also we could find. Today we heard from Dr. Mario about the success in Tanzania. And in my opinion, before it was from top to bottom, but now we need to start from bottom. So we have to start with smallholder farmers. We need to have a dialogue. We have to hear from them to see what is their problems, what their needs, and also what they can do. And also this partnership, we have to have the same dialogue with all partners, with the government, private sector, public, and so on. Because at the end, as we heard today, it must be, at the end, we must reach to an agreement. This agreement must be depends on what is the clear role for each partner, and also we have to consider the sustainability. Sustainability is the most important. If we can reach to a clear and concrete rule for all partners, and with an agreement for the financial and the rules, I think we can ensure to have a sustainable partnership. I have one comment. Dr. Mario, he talked about insurance. I think the most important to invest in infrastructure. It's better than to wait until to have the damage and to give the insurance to. Our main constraint now and based on climate change, we don't have the strong infrastructure to be able to face the climate change impact, especially with floods. I fully recommend it to consider to give more support for infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's a question up there. You can go ahead.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for the talks and highlighting the importance of partnership and coming up with concrete case studies in terms of how that can be done. I wanted to specify the evidence that we gather. It will be helpful then to map and come up with evidence which can then be indicating as to how to ensure to bridge that gap of not only signing but really coming up with concrete action that follows. I know he specifically was making a swap, at leadership in that regard. But what I'm trying to suggest that from our research that we do, we can then best advise and through policy dialogue such as this, and even written work using evidence to then chart the way in which that gap can be bridged. Secondly, I wanted to then highlight the importance and underscore the importance of capacity development, that the lessons that are being, we all know about climate change as was discussed yesterday, and we know that things need to change, that we can't do farming as usual, that things need to change. But there's not a lot of capacity development in terms of enhancing the skills that the farmers would need to improve, their practice to ensure that they have, resilient food systems as the key message that's being highlighted here.
Thank you so much. Gentleman at the back, and then we'll come to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I have two reflections. and one is on the PPPs. I mean, we often look on the big companies or multinationals when we talk about public-private partnerships, but we have even more examples. I could talk of Tanzania, for example, where we have even more effective public-private partnership, but with really small companies. Like I'm talking about small hotels, small water users. We often say the water users or the farmers, they don't have money. But I could tell, at least from Tanzania, we have really traditional pharaohs that has, let's say, about 2,000 people. And they are really organized, and I mean, internally, they are organized, and I'm sure they have lots of money, and they have their own projects and programs they are conducting in there. So when we are talking about this kind of partnerships also, let's look of the models where we can focus also on this really small private sector, like the pharaohs, the hotels, and the others. And I also have examples from Tanzania, and I can talk about that later on. And the second point I was about to mention was about these international certification programs and processes, like Alliance for Water Stewardship Standards, for example. This could be a real good incentive for the private sector also to keep on investing in different water programs. And I think it will be a good input for the public sector when they're implementing of the IWRIM, because the funding is one of the biggest problems that they are facing. So yeah, that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those recommendations. There's a gentleman over here.
Hello? Working? This is for Kevin. Mate, you've lost a lot of hair since your cricket career finished. But no, in seriousness, I had two questions relating to the groundwater. The first is for the aquifers that you've identified or characterized. What sort of contamination, if any, have you found? And how serious is it? And the second question is around the proximity of groundwater sources to existing irrigation areas and infrastructure, because you flagged the potential transmission costs of getting groundwater to existing built-up areas for agriculture. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for those questions. Yeah, I've lost a lot of hair since my cricket career ended. I think in terms of aquifer characterization and looking at both from a quantity and a quality perspective, from a Africa-wide perspective, from a SADC-wide perspective, there's not real issues around groundwater quality. Where there is issues is around natural groundwater salinity, issues around natural contaminants like fluoride. But there's not real issues around artificially induced contaminants into the system. Where we found pollution events, it relates mostly to nitrates, mostly related to on-site sanitation systems. So you've got those type of contaminant type of issues that predominate. But I don't think it is at a level where it would make an aquifer unusable or not utilizable. Now I know you've got hotspot areas. I know in the Western Cape we have issues of pesticides as an example. So there is areas where it is, and then basically most of these aquifer systems transcends highly productive agricultural areas. In terms of mapping its relationship, we haven't done that, and I think this is an opportunity to bring these various disciplines together in terms of trying to have that type of mapping take place and see to what extent we can use groundwater as a foundational resource for establishing businesses and so forth. In order to do that, you require the system to be looked after, to be monitored. It's not a system that you can leave alone. So it requires that level of issues. And then just coming back to the issue that I tried to highlight in my presentation, the issue of water storage is critical, I think, for climate change adaptation. And our focus has been always on grey infrastructure. I think we now need to move more to green infrastructure and how we use the natural systems in terms of climate resilience. I think hopefully I've answered.
Thank you. There's an online question we quickly want to do, and okay.
To the lady who spoke about research, please give us the money. We'll do the research tomorrow morning. We'll start it tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Your marketing.
Okay, the online question is, what is the average area of overlap between surface, river catchment boundaries and transboundary aquifers? Kevin, Dr. Peterson, sounds like you.
Yeah, that is a very difficult question to answer because it depends where you are. We haven't done analysis globally. In that map that James alluded to right in the beginning, basically showed where our transboundary aquifer systems are and where our river basin organizations are. So within a river basin organization, you may have 3-4 transboundary aquifer systems, in some cases none. So it just depends where you are. So it's very difficult to give an average type of figure from that. I'm sure we can do it on a GIS type of analysis, but I have not done that.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. Perhaps next to your next colleague. And we're going to wrap up now. Last reflections from any of the speakers, please.
Yes, thank you. I might just connect with what Bonani said earlier about being proudly South African as well. So we do have another example in the South African wine industry where we pull together resources from various funding bodies, and within that project the outcome was that we wrote a book of Vine and Wine, and that actually won an award amongst other publications. I think there was a lot of publications that won the award as the best publication of that year. So I think let's be proudly South African and work on the partnerships. There's a lot of good things happening as well.
Well, there was a question actually that I wanted to take first regarding to the insurance. Actually, it came with a comment first that maybe we should focus more on improving our infrastructure rather than thinking on insurance. I can agree with that, but well, as a downstream country, Mozambique actually experiencing a very extreme event. And you can imagine that, a dike that has been designed, for instance, for 25 or 50 years return period of floods is being overtopped today. So if we have to go back to the engineering and maybe project it to 100 years, you can imagine how huge this infrastructure will be. I also totally agree with what has been mentioned, that also the collaboration and partnership between, riparian countries also is important when it comes to the water management component. But yet, I have still the thinking that we have to come out with appropriate partnership depending on the level that we are considering, either the farmer levels or the government levels. But definitely we have to think wisely that way. Thank you.
Yeah, I think my last thought would be, I think there's a lot of wisdom in this room. And I think what all of the speakers have said, we can actually, in a meaningful way, tap into that wisdom that is of benefit to a host of industries out there in order to make agriculture more sustainable and more profitable. So how do we use collective wisdom and package that so that we can have meaningful and mutual beneficial partnerships? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think from the discussion, what is clear is that partnerships are important. And from the presentation I made and from my experience in Tanzania, interventions are beneficial, and interventions contribute a lot when there are right partnerships forged, of course, between farmers and other key stakeholders. So I think addressing some of the challenges in smallholder agriculture, I think important is to form partnerships that really are beneficial to both parties. And of course, it's important that we don't forget farmers in this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I will reiterate a statement that was made by someone yesterday that without water there's no agriculture. So I repeat the same question today, and to also reiterate that both surface and groundwater constitute water security. We cannot talk of one without the other. So I think the tradition of talking about water security being surface water also has to be swept away, and we concentrate on both surface and groundwater. I would also want to mention that for smallholder farming, suppose the context that I had, we are probably talking of people in dispersed locations. We are not always talking about huge commercial farms, and these rely in many circumstances on groundwater. So the conjunctive use of both surface and groundwater in those dispersed locations is indispensable if we are going to have food and water and food security. Thank you.
Thank you to my co-presenters. I learned a lot from them. Quite interesting stuff. And thank you for the questions. But to everybody, also the organizers, thank you. But I want us to. My last point will be: let's learn to dream about things. I don't think the Wright brothers, when they first flew, had an idea of what an Airbus was going to look like. I don't think they had. I don't think Alexander Bell knew that there was going to be a mobile phone. And I don't think the first inventor of the mobile phone knew that the mobile phone was going to receive my email. So what are we going to do about our water and agriculture? Let's dream and let's make it happen. But let's not just dream let's not dream and sit and fantasize. Let's make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, colleagues. And with that, the session is closed. Thank you for your time.
I'm just making an
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much to Dr. Visa, to her panelists as well, for such an insightful panel. Just quickly, we have missed the window for the tea, so I have to apologize for that because the kitchen said they're closed. We were supposed to have tea at 3:30, and I had asked them to hold it until 4 o'clock, but then it's now 25 past 4. So I don't know if you can quickly walk over that side to see if there's anything. If there is no tea, fear not. Our dinner is going to start at 6 p.m. tonight. So we meet outside by the cafeteria at 6 p.m. for the welcome drinks and for the start of the evening. Thank you so much. I'm also inviting you actually at this time to take a walk through the exhibition booths that we have. Those that have not had a chance to meet with any of the exhibitors, this is your opportunity. There is so much information that is being shared there. There are also very nice freebies that are nice to have. So please do take time and go through the booths and interact with the partners that are exhibiting. Thank you so much.
about the field trip tomorrow. They're tired.
Sorry, one last thing. Sorry. Field trip tomorrow. When you come in for, I think it's going to happen after lunch. So they have asked specifically that for the field trip, people should be dressed comfortably, meaning, walking shoes, because it's going to be a walk. Also, please do have your sun hats, have your sunscreen, and anything that you might need to be out and about, because it's going to be a day of walking around the fields and seeing what's happening. So please prepare for that. Caps. There's actually caps being distributed at the AATF stand, so if you don't have a hat, you can pass through the AATF stand. Thanks.